At this point, we have Set intertwined with a number of Hebrew narratives. In fact, Set is interwoven throughout most of the Hebrew narratives. You see Set's name all over the place, even with these apocryphal sorts of works, such as the Book of Enoch. You see Set even in there. And of course, you see Set intertwined with these identities, such as Seth and Shem, among other names. Another dynamic is that Set is interwoven with respect to the monarchies in various parts of Europe and perhaps just throughout the world. We are just looking at this one discrete dynamic going on now, but very much interwoven with royalty. It's also indicated that Set is understood as the patron, as one of the patron deities of the pharaohs. So this would include kings and queens. Set goes by a number of names just in general. So we're not talking about anything that's really deep here, but just these basic transliterations. There are so many transliterations, but you can see a few of them on the screen. And this is in addition to the ones that we have addressed before. And so what we're looking at now is how Set is not only related to or correlated with the kings in the Hebrew narrative, but Set is also understood as correlated with the priest in the Hebrew narrative, specifically the high priest. And so the high priest in these narratives, they basically have the name of Set inside of these names. And we're going to look at how these translations work out. And as you can see here with one of those transliterations of Set, we have this word Setekh. And this goes right back to what's seen in scripture. This is another word for teat. This is the biological part of a woman's body, understood as the breast. And again, Set is often understood as the breasted one or many-breasted one. Now, what's interesting is that you see these indications that that's supposed to be a masculine dynamic. However, it's related to female anatomy. And now we can look at the specific names that are tied to Set, or these are just transliterations of Set or translations of Set. Of course, the name Setekh or Setekh. Also Zadoc. Also Melchizedek and Sidkenu. Now, these names are very important because these names are prominent in terms of meaning in the Hebrew narrative. With Zadoc, Melchizedek, and Sidkenu, there is the translation, the understanding that these names translate to righteous or righteousness. And so in this way, Set is transformed from what we understand Set to be to that which is righteous. Now we're going to look at how Zadoc translates as Seth or Set. And here, when you look at this translation of Zadoc, you see that this is coming from Slovak language, interestingly, and it's translating into the English synonymous with Set. So not only do you have this name as a transliteration of Set specifically, but if you look over to the right-hand side, you see those other words that are associated with Set. And so these are translations of Set, translations of Zadoc, and also in some ways transliteration. So they are related to that Setekh transliteration. This relationship between Set And the Hebrew narrative is very interesting and it's profound. And so you should pay very close attention to this particular dynamic. What is noted is that Set is understood as the high priest of the Hebrew narrative, so the high priest of Israel. And so not only is Set, this Zadoc, presented as the high priest, this entity is a part of a perpetual priesthood monopoly. And so this entity is the end all be all when it comes to this high priesthood. Specifically, Zadoc or Set was the high priest during the reign of David and Solomon. And so this entity, this Set entity, is related to what's known as a Cohen or Kohen priest, descended from Aaron. What's also interesting about this and consistent with these narratives of Set and Shem is that Zadoc participated in the usurpation of the throne in support of Solomon. And so Solomon was a younger sibling, but Solomon ended up taking the throne when it was not his rightful place to take. So he was not the next in line in terms of succession, but this again is consistent with this bizarre dynamic wherein the firstborn can never actually rise to the position that the firstborn is supposed to have. And so there are these repeated narratives related to Set wherein the firstborn is supplanted. Now remember, Solomon's name initially was Jedediah, but even in this dynamic, we see the situation where Solomon is even taking on the name of Absalom, which was his brother. And if you look at the name Absalom, you can see that it is essentially the same thing as Solomon. And so Solomon takes on this new identity with the assistance of the prophet Nathan and Zadoc, the high priest. Now, again, interestingly, this name means righteous or justified, virtuous, blameless, honest, and moral. Okay, so what's happening here is the glorification of the name Set, glorifying the essence of Set. And so you see these repeated dynamics wherein Set is glorified in the Hebrew narrative. And so no longer is Set presented as Set, but what Set is presented as righteousness. This name Zadoc or Set is also another name for a Hebrew god. So the Hebrew god has many names. In other words, we are talking about a pantheon yet again. But another name is Sidkenu, and this Sidkenu is the same as Zadoc and Sutekh and Setekh and Set. And so now we're going to start looking at some of these transliterations so that you can see very clearly how Zadoc is simply another name for Set. And it's coming about through this Sutekh or Setekh name and also these letter exchanges. And we're going to look at some of these letter exchanges so that you can see how these names are sort of hidden inside of other names. And so if you look here, you can see these transliteration dynamics. And if you look on the right-hand side, right up at the top, you see Zadoc. Now, Zadoc can be spelled in a number of ways. And so these variations are what lead to this connection between Sutekh or Setekh and Zadoc. And so you can see right up front that there is a letter exchange with the K and the Q. That's one option. You also, when you see the Zadoc, pronounced with the S sound, you see the K and the C interchange at the end. And then with this TZ and TS beginning, you see again another exchange with the K and the Q. And so there are a number of letter exchanges that make it so that when you see it, you might not automatically recognize what you are seeing, but all of these are set. And you even see some interesting dynamics going on with the Cohen spelling. And so you see the Hakohen, and then there is A, and then Kohen, and then a spelling where the K is replaced with the C, so Cohen. And these entities are considered descendants from Aaron. Now, of course, part of the mystery revolves around these letter exchanges. And so, what you can look out for, just in general, is a dynamic where T and D are exchanged. You might also see an exchange with B, V, and P. And so, remember the betacism dynamic. With respect to the letter S, you can see a number of interesting interchanges. And so the S may be replaced by a TS or a Z or Set's special letter X, ZH, and also C. And it brings up the question of whether Set or Sat is also an alternative for the word cat. Other interchanges involve the letter U along with the letter V and the letter W. And so in various languages, you might see these variations indicating that these are all the same sounds or similar sounds. And then we see these K and C interchanges. And again, remember C and S are interchanges. And so these interchanges can become very complicated. And so you have to be very alert in order to notice them sometimes. And so the K and the C might be interchanged with CH, KH, QU, and the letter G. And finally, this is a big one because it involves these vowels. And so you might see these vowels interchange, and that makes it increasingly complicated in terms of recognizing these relationships. But when you look at all of these various interchanges, you can see how Zadoc and Set are essentially the same names. You also see with Melchizedek that Zadoc is inside of that, Sutekh is inside of that, Setekh is inside of that, ergo Set is inside of that, and as you know, Judah is inside of that, and you also have Shem inside of that, and a variety of other names inside of that. And now we're going to look at how Set is inside of this construct of Sedak or Sedkinu, okay? And so what we have here is this understanding at Strong's, interestingly, 6666, okay, in the Hebrew. We have a little Set's calling card here. We see that this is supposed to be a feminine noun, and it's translating as righteousness. So again, you see this indication of the identity of Set being transformed from what Set is understood as in Egyptian history to what Set is understood as, according to this name, this transliteration in this Hebrew narrative. And so Set is translated as righteousness. And here again, we see this translation, and in this instance, again, it's translating as a feminine noun meaning right doing, and this is at 6665. And here you see very clearly Set's name as this translation. Interestingly, there's a little flip here. So we are at 6664, and this is a masculine noun in this instance, and this is that Setekh, Zadoc, and it means rightness or righteousness. And so all of those translations are indicating this dynamic of righteousness or right doing. And here in Britannica, we see that Melchizedek is understood as a biblical figure. In this text that appears to be coming out of the 1800s, we see another notation about Melchizedek. And here we see Melchizedek identified in a way that is consistent with Zadoc, this high priest identity, this priest king identity. And here we see that Melchizedek is associated with Shem. And so in this narrative, Shem is to take Melchizedek, who is identified as a son of Canaan. And this Canaan in this instance is spelled Cain. Okay, and so he's supposed to take Melchizedek, this son of Canaan, to be this high priest. He's supposed to be a priest of the Most High, and he's supposed to minister on this mountain that's in the middle of the earth before the body of Adam, their father, forever. And so this is an interesting narrative that's tying Shem to Adam and Melchizedek to Canaan and to this high priest identity with respect to Shem and Shem's descendants. Now, also, there's an interesting notation about Shem in this book of Enoch, wherein Shem is presented as the chief angel, that is the fallen one. After which all of the angels, these fallen angels, follow. And so Shem is not only presented as this descendant of Noah, but in this Ethiopic piece of writing, there is this identification of Shem as not only the chief fallen angel, but you see a number of other fallen angels that are sharing this same name along with a number of other interesting names. And here you can see those letter exchanges with respect to this name Melchizedek. And Melchizedek has quite a history, and so there's a little bit of confusion about who Melchizedek was exactly. And there are a few narratives about this Melchizedek name. But Melchizedek has Sutek or Setekh inside of the name. And so you have Melchizedek or Melchizedek. And this is essentially indicating sort of a righteous ruler. So a righteous king, the Malki king, Malek king, and then Setekh or Sutek, meaning righteous. And here you can see it together, king and righteousness. And so here at 3072, we see this Sidkinu deconstructed, and it indicates here that this Yehovah Sidkinu is the Lord is our righteousness. And this is also a symbolic name for Jerusalem and the Messiah. And so you see this Set, Sidkinu, Zadoc, Setekh name meaning righteousness, meaning Almighty, meaning Messiah, and meaning Judah. And you see the various transliterations over on the right-hand side, along with that Horus translation that we've seen before. Now we're going to quickly look at this coronation song dynamic. What we find is that there was this coronation song created for the coronation of George, and this is in 1727, somewhere around that time. And so what we have with respect to this coronation song is a song called Zadoc, the priest. The lyrics to the song go, Zadoc the priest and Nathan the prophet anointed Solomon king. And then it repeats that. And it indicates, and all the people rejoiced, and all the people rejoiced. Now, if you recall the dynamics of the 1700s, you know that this is basically glorifying the supplanting dynamic that took place with that succession battle. There were multiple succession battles, if you recall, going on in Europe and in Africa at this time. And so what's going on with this song by Handel is a glorification of Zadoc, a glorification of this supplanting dynamic, because again, we have this situation wherein Solomon is being anointed king when Solomon was not really next in line to the throne. And this is synonymous with what was taking place in relation to the Stuarts and this George situation. And so this coronation song has been used throughout time after its creation, even being used for the most recent coronation. So that makes it, also interesting, because there is that assertion that the Stuarts are the ones who are supposed to be on the throne. But here we have this glorification of Zadoc, the priest, in relation to this coronation dynamic. So Zadoc has his own song. And you also have, again, this dynamic wherein the kings of the earth are not simply kings, but there is a close relationship between kings or queens and clergy. You saw that with those papal bulls, how the clergy was really directing the course of events with respect to the sovereigns of these various countries. When we look at how these coronations take place, what we see is this dynamic of priest king. The clergy are heavily involved in the coronation process. And so it's a religious process. It's not a secular process. And so there is this priest king dynamic that takes place in these coronations. And this ties into what King James thought of as the divine right of kings. And there was this belief in the divine right of kings, not only in Europe, but all over the world. So there was sort of this respect for other royalty all over the world, understanding all of them as ruling divinely. Now, when you look at the narrative in the book of Enoch, it appears that there is an assertion that these entities that are considered priest kings, that they are in and of themselves demigods. And so they are elevated to this status, this sort of divinity, this deity status, simply by birth.